Hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome to My IVF Answers and welcome to our webinar tonight. And if you've been here with us yesterday, you know that our special guest is right here. Once again, Dr. Vladimiro Silva is right here. He was here yesterday, and I'm very happy that you are back with some more details, with some more success stories. And how are you feeling tonight? Hope you had a great day and are ready to help us out here as well.
Hi, Caroline. It's like I always say, it's always a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be back here. Yesterday, I was filling in for Dr. Paula Manso. She couldn't make it to her webinar, but today is my webinar, so hopefully it's more interesting. Well, at least I'm more capable of knowing what I'm talking about. And what I said yesterday, I will say it again today. I think it's a great initiative from you to be talking about examples of success, because nobody that goes through infertility or those that do treatments, but they need to resource to an IVF clinic because they can't get pregnant because they need a sperm donor or what other reason. It's always important for those persons to understand that this might actually work. Okay, there are success stories behind, and obviously everyone that is listening to us has certainly some background, some past without things working out naturally or trying, but so eventually all of these stories that I'm telling, that other that other persons from other clinics are telling, those are real cases that actually happen. So I think that's inspiring. That's a source of strength for those who are yet to start the process or that are already doing treatment. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about some of those cases.
And we are definitely incredibly happy that you are back, and we'll present, I think, 4 cases tonight. So I'm sure it's going to be interesting. You mentioned them a bit for me. So as you said, it's always inspiring to see what can be done, what kind of problems actually people can have, and how much investigation sometimes needs to be taken in order to find a solution as well. So thank you so much indeed. We are definitely happy with all this project because I've seen many, many positive comments so far. And thank you so much, everyone, of course, for joining us tonight. I'm sure you have some interesting questions, detailed questions. So remember, there will be time for you. Prepare them. If you have them prepared, you can put them in straight away, of course. And Dr. Silva will take care of them for you right after his presentation. And as you know, tonight we will talk about genetics and PGT-A. Dr. Silva has prepared 4 cases, as I've mentioned, and remember, this is going to be recorded. And that is it from me. Okay, I think we can go ahead with the presentation first of all. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
I will start sharing my screen.
Yes, please.
1 second. Okay, I think you're watching my screen right now. So that's it. Okay.
It is okay. So, we can see it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So today's topic is patients with genetic issues, success stories. Like I said before, this is about patients knowing that this kind of treatments can work. And this is actually a very broad theme because genetics, we could spend the whole night talking about it. I'm not a specialist in genetics, so I will talk only on the IVF perspective. And I will tell you some stories. I've actually narrowed it down to 3 cases, not 4 like I was telling Caroline yesterday. But I can talk to you about the 4th case if we have time. Okay, so first of all, when we talk about IVF and genetics, it is very important to know, to settle up, what can we do? Well, we have to talk, and we have to talk a lot with patients because genetics starts with counseling, with having great embryos, and roughly speaking, testing the embryos. And so genetics is also about making informed decisions about your embryos. when we're talking about genetics, a lot of times we are talking about things that we cannot do anything about it. If you're a carrier for a genetic disease, you have to live with that. If you are a woman older than 39, let's say, your eggs will always have, at least in a certain percentage, a certain risk of being aneuploid or having genetic abnormalities, and we cannot do anything about it. So, however, we can know whether those problems exist or not, and it is in our power to decide what we can do with that information. And so the decisions that we make regarding the type of treatment, the course of treatment, the way we have to organize treatments, they are very important, and genetics can help us a lot to choose the way to do our treatments and the best way to get a pregnancy and the birth of a healthy child. So actually, just before making this call, I was discussing with a patient on a genetics issue. Okay, I can talk about that case later, but so start getting back to the presentation. What's the point of doing genetics? So IVF is very useful to prevent the transmission of genetic diseases. It is also very used to screen for potential genetic problems. Some of them are age-related, some of them are not. We are born with them. And it is also used to find HLA-compatible embryos in very special cases. For example, we're talking about compatibility to do bone marrow transplantations and things like that. So IVF can also help us with that. We have, roughly speaking, 3 types of genetic tests that we can do in IVF and a subtype of one of them. So we can do genetic tests for monogenic diseases. For example, if you're a carrier of a certain disease like Huntington disease, like neurofibromatosis. I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of genetic diseases. And if your partner is also a carrier, in the case of recessive diseases, or if it is an autosomal dominant disease, this means that if you are a carrier, you will always have the disease. You are at risk, and you can resource to IVF to avoid passing that disease to your child. We can also screen for aneuploidies. I will explain what's that later. So in the first case, that's PGT-M, preimplantation genetic test for monogenic disease. Then we have preimplantation genetic test for aneuploidies, PGT-A. Then we have aneuploidies are the genetic abnormalities that are usually age-related. So they increase with the progression of age. And then we also have preimplantation genetic tests for structural rearrangements. This is a kind of sometimes we are a carrier of a genetic abnormality in our karyotype, in the number of chromosomes that we have, but that change is balanced. So we don't have any disease. We live a completely normal life because we have all the DNA that we require in order to do that. But when we are forming our gametes, our sperm or our eggs, in the case of women, there could be problems. I will talk about that later on. And then I will also talk about HLA compatibility, which is very important, especially for bone marrow transplantation cases and situations like those. Starting with PGT-A. PGT-A is what we usually call, we were used to call PGS, preimplantation genetic screening. It is a genetic test that we do on embryos to screen for numerical chromosomal abnormalities. So we all have to have 46 chromosomes, and sometimes either because of the egg or because of the sperm, embryos can have an extra chromosome or a missing chromosome. This is what we call an aneuploidy. Okay, embryos with the wrong number of chromosomes. If we have that, embryos with the wrong number of chromosomes, those embryos will most likely fail to implant, and so we will have a negative result. or if they implant, they can lead to a miscarriage, but in some situations, if implantation is successful, they can lead to the birth of a handicapped child or a child with a genetic condition. When we have a chromosomally normal embryo, we call it an euploid embryo, and so we know for a fact that these embryos are more likely to lead to a successful pregnancy. At Ferticentro, we use the latest technology to do PGT-A. This is what's called the next generation sequencing method. It's NGS technique. It's used all over the world these days. And this allows us to analyze all 24 chromosomes because we have 23 pairs, so a total of 46. 22 pairs of somatic chromosomes, the chromosomes that are related to our physical characteristics, and the last pair is the sexual chromosome. So if you're a woman, you have two X chromosomes. If you are a man, you have an X and a Y chromosome. So in those cases, so there are 24 different types of chromosomes, but only 23 pairs. So these chromosomal abnormalities are detected prior to embryo transfer. So we get the eggs, we fertilize them in the lab, we create embryos, we culture the embryos until day 5 or day 6. In some rare cases, we might even take them to day 7. And then we make a small hole in the embryo, we take some cells out, and we test those cells. We freeze the embryo, and we wait for the result of those tests. What's this for? This allows patients to make informed decisions about their treatment. So this is not about making your embryos better. This is about getting information on and the capacity to select the best embryo and also make informed decisions about your treatment. If, for example, none of your embryos is viable, you might think or you might consider egg donation, or you won't lose time transferring lots and lots of embryos. I remember a case of a patient who had 10 blastocysts, which was a wonderful result, but when we tested them, they were all carriers for genetic abnormalities. And so in those cases, unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do because we cannot change nature. So by doing PGT-A, that patient saved maybe 10 negative embryo transfers if she transferred one embryo at the time. Even if she transferred 2 embryos at the time, those would be at least 5 embryo transfers. So PGT-A can reduce the number of cycles needed to obtain a pregnancy. And for example, the case that I took out of this presentation was about a lady who did an egg donation cycle with us. She got, I think it was 8 blastocysts, and we've transferred her 3 or 4 of them, and the results were negative. And then we tested the remaining blastocysts, and it turned out that only 2 of them were viable. We transferred one of the viables, and she immediately got pregnant. So sometimes we obviously use a lot of technologies, the embryoscope, time-lapse imaging, and so on. That's very useful to understand which are the most viable embryos. However, the genetic testing gives us more accurate and more complete information about the quality of the embryos. And so if we have 10 embryos and just one of them is viable, it's preferable to start to transfer that embryo and save the patient from an unnecessary number of negative results, or maybe even miscarriages and all the potential consequences of that. The thing about PGT-A is that it is very related to maternal age, to female age. We can see this here in this graphic, that until above the age of 35, the probability of having abnormal embryos spikes. And it ends up at 76% at the age of 43 or 44 years old. So normally at our clinic, it is above the age of 39. That's also the Portuguese law, which is when there is already a chance of 60%, roughly speaking, to find an abnormal, a chromosomally abnormal embryo that we advise patients to do PGT-A. So, but this is also why egg donation is such a good alternative for many patients, because we know that egg donors have less than 35 years old, and so that's when the risk of having a chromosomal abnormality is lower. Obviously, chromosomal abnormalities can also come from the sperm, but in statistical terms, this is more associated with the maternal age, with the quality of the egg. And so here you can have a graphic from iGenomics. The previous one was also from iGenomics. iGenomics is a genetics lab, one of the biggest ones in the world. And here we can see very interesting information. You can see in the gray bars the results of IVF with PGT-A, the implantation rates, and you will see that results are relatively steady across all age groups. This is the age lower than 35, above 42 years old. Below 42 years old. And so you can see that even though it goes a little bit down, the differences are not that significant. However, in the orange bars, you will see the natural pregnancy rate without PGT-A. This is not because PGT-A improves your chance of getting a baby. It's just because it helps us to identify the most viable embryos. Okay, so this is a population of selected embryos. The reason why this goes down is because we also have to think about the uterus and the endometrium, and this is a population of unselected embryos, because we know that, like we've seen in the previous graphic, the older a patient gets, the more likely we are to find problems. And obviously, delivery rates follow the same trend, and miscarriages rates follow the exact opposite trend. So when we are doing PGT-A, we're less likely to have a miscarriage, because obviously we identify embryos with genetic abnormalities. When we're not doing it, we are risking the transfer of embryos with genetic abnormalities. And so this is another reason to do it. Obviously, the risk is very age-related. For example, when we are talking about an egg donation case, since the donors all belong to this group, there is really no difference. Okay, so it doesn't make sense to do it. We could somehow optimize the embryos to be transferred, but the differences in delivery rates are neglectable. So in principle, sorry for this. So in principle, it makes no sense to do PGT-A in egg donation cases. However, with the progression of female age, it starts to make sense. Like I was saying, in Portugal, it is above the age of 39, and you can see it here, why the Portuguese IVF authorities have defined that. And so this is our policy. We advise PGT-A to all women above the age of 39, including 39, because that's really the moment where where the risk of having a miscarriage starts to rise, and where delivery rates start to go down. Then we have PGT-M, which was formerly known as preimplantation genetic diagnosis. PGT-M, preimplantation genetic test for monogenic disease, is used to avoid the chance of having a child with an inherited genetic disorder. So it's the same as PGT-A. We create the embryos in the lab, we analyze them before the embryo transfer, and we identify those who carry the altered disease-causing gene. This is intended to patients. Sorry, there is a typo in my presentations, who are known to carry serious genetic diseases, either autosomal dominant or recessive. It's a custom designed test for every patient, because even though you can already have had a genetics consultation and have the characterization of your specific mutations, because it's like with the COVID, there are thousands of or hundreds of variations for every disease. So with genetics disease, it's more or less the same. For example, for cystic fibrosis alone, there are more than 1,500 known mutations. So we have to, even though we have to identify those mutations, then there are still interpatient differences that we have to identify in order to prepare the test. So all patients have to do an initial test. This is what we call the pre-PGT test. This is used to prepare the test. Then we create the embryos. We take the cells out of the embryo. We freeze the embryo. We wait for the PGT results. We send those cells to the genetics lab, and then they will tell us whether that embryo is a carrier, for example, of the Huntington's disease, neurofibromatosis, cystic fibrosis, spinal muscular atrophy. There are so lots and lots, hemophilia, there are lots and lots of diseases. So, and then we have Pgtsr. What is this? It's preimplantation genetics testing for structural chromosomal rearrangements. It works the same way. We create the embryos, we take some cells out, and this is for patients. Another typo here, it is intended to patients who are known to carry karyotype abnormalities. So we're talking about deletions, translocations, inversions. So the patient has sometimes a part of a chromosome is swiped with another chromosome, and so at the moment that the gametes are being built, it causes an imbalance in forming the spermatozoa and the eggs in the case of women. So this can be inherited, or this may occur spontaneously. This is a karyotype abnormality that affects 1 in every 500 people. It doesn't cause any problems to the person that carries this abnormality. Normally, they only find it when they try to have a baby, because they're getting negative results. They don't know why, and then we do a karyotype test and we find that. So people have normal, healthy lives without even knowing they are carriers for this translocation. They might have kids naturally as well, because this just lowers. It's a question of chance whether a man is producing normal spermatozoa and a woman is producing normal eggs. It's really a question of luck whether he or she are transmitting the correct gametes every way. The problem with this is obviously that, for example, a classic example, translocation between chromosome 14 and chromosome 7. A part of the 14 is on the chromosome 7, a part of the 7 is in the chromosome 14. So that person has all the DNA necessary to have a normal, healthy life, and so that person personally doesn't have any issue. However, when, let's say it's a woman, when she's forming her eggs, we're only transmitting 23, one chromosome from every pair. And so if we transfer to our egg, to the egg, the wrong chromosome, for example, the 7 who has a part of the 14, the only way to balance it is if the 14 that has a part of the 7 is also transmitted. If she passes the 7 with a part of the 14 and the normal 14, then there is an imbalance, because there will be too much of the 14 chromosome. Okay, so it might be too technical, but this is a classic situation where a normal person is producing abnormal eggs. So this can cause the same issues, either miscarriages or negative pregnancy results, or maybe the birth of a child with genetic abnormalities. The examples are chromosome duplications, deletions, inversions, translocations. I will not talk very much about it. This is just for you to know that this can happen in 1 in every 500 persons. And then there is the case that I was talking about in some situations, for example, with children with some very severe diseases. The only way to find for them, the only solution to treat them is by finding a compatible sibling, a compatible bone marrow donor. And sometimes compatible bone donor marrow are very hard to find, and often the only solution is to have a genetically compatible sibling. These situations always have to be approved by the national IVF authorities. Those are ethically complex cases, and so, but yet they allow us to save lives of children that otherwise will have no chance of survival. Okay, so I will now talk about some success stories. I will start by patient number 1. Her name is Joanna. It's obviously a fake name. She's 42 years old. She was 42 years old when she came to the clinic. She was single. She never tried for a pregnancy. She had a normal BMI. And then she decided to have a solo project with a sperm donor, an anonymous sperm donor. We did her an ovarian reserve evaluation. We got this astonishing value of 5.1. This is an amazing result for every age, especially because her FSH and her LH were very well balanced. So her ovaries were working very well. We did an aggressive stimulation still because we knew that, okay, from a normal point of view, we had everything we could dream of, which is a wonderful ovarian reserve. However, there was the age factor, and that it's impossible. We can't make time go backwards. So we needed a lot of eggs. And so the stimulation wasn't actually that wonderful. We only get, we had 9 eggs, which was great. Okay, it's great in every age group. But from a 5.1 AMH, we could expect like 20 eggs or so. But still, we got 9 eggs, and then 2 day 6 blastocysts. Then we did PGT-A, and we found that one of the embryos was aneuploid, meaning he had either an extra or a missing chromosome, and another one was a mosaic embryo with 30% of the cells. So what's a mosaic embryo? Because we have to remember that when we do a PGT-A, we're only taking a group of cells from the embryo, normally 5 or 6 cells, because we work with day 5 or day 6 blastocysts. So sometimes they could or could not be representative for the rest of the embryo. We can't obviously test all of the cells of the embryo, because otherwise we would lose the embryo. So the theory behind PGT-A is that those 5 or 6 cells are representative of the rest of the embryo. And so in this group of cells, 30% of them were abnormal and 70% of them were normal. We had to talk with the patient. She was counseled by our genetician, and then she made the informed decision of transferring the embryo. And we were lucky, and she was lucky, obviously, because she had 2 cell lines, and the normal cell line overlapped the abnormal cell line, and so we had an healthy child. She did amniocentesis, and the karyotype of the child was okay, and then the child is already born. She's a very beautiful baby girl with a normal karyotype, and everything went well. So this is a typical case of a lady who had, for whom PGT-A was actually very important, because one of the embryos wasn't viable, and the fact that she did PGT-A led her to make an informed decision about mosaicism, and also while doing the prenatal diagnosis procedure, the doctors knew that they had to do an amniocentesis because of the PGT-A result. Then we had this amazing example of Helen. Helen is obviously another fake name. She was 40 years old when she came to the clinic. She was also single. Her BMI was 25, so it was borderline normal. And she was a carrier of a genetic disease. It was an autosomal genetic disease, which means that she had a 50% risk of transmitting that disease to a kid. And so we had to do the pre-PGT test. We had to test her. We had to test the donor. We keep DNA from our donors. We sent that DNA to the genetics lab in order to do the pre-PGT test. Then we started the stimulation. We started with HMG. We had in 375 international units a day, which is considered to be an aggressive protocol, and we got 5x. It wasn't too much because we were expecting to lose 50% because of the genetic disease alone, and the age factor at 40, it's more or less 20% of pregnancy rate. So from this 5, we will stay with 2.5 and losing and only having 20%. 20% of 2.5, it's half an embryo. So it was very likely that we wouldn't have any viable embryo. So we did a second stimulation. We've frozen these eggs, and the result was amazingly different. We changed the gonadotrophin, and the reaction was actually a lot better. We really don't know why, but we got 29 eggs. Okay, it was a completely amazing and wonderful result for a 40-year-old patient, and we've fertilized all of the 34 eggs. We warmed the 5 that have been collected initially. We got 22 on developing embryos and 13 blastocysts. We did the PGT-M. From those 13, 7 were not carriers of the genetic disease, and then we did PGT-A in order to test it, because sometimes an embryo is not a carrier of the genetic mutation, the monogenic disease, but it can be, for example, a trisomy 21. And we did the PGT-A, the pre-implantation genetic test for aneuploidies, on the 7 blastocysts that were not carriers for the genetic mutation, and 6 of them were euploid, which was also an amazing result. We've transferred just one of them, and then we had the birth of an healthy child, and we still have 5 blastocysts frozen. This is a wonderful case as well, and so a very good prognosis for Helen. And then we have the case of Christina. Christina was 25 years old when she came to the clinic. She had a normal BMI. She was married. She already had a child, and her child had a very severe and serious hematological disease. According to the pediatrician's team that was taking care of her daughter, the only solution to treat the existing child will be through a bone marrow transplant from a compatible donor. They were waiting for 3 years to find a compatible donor. It didn't happen, and they knew that the theoretical probability of finding a compatible donor in a sibling was 20%. We submitted an authorization request to the Portuguese IVF authority, the CNPMA. They authorized treatment, and so we did the treatment to search for HLA compatibility selection. It's kind of a specialized form of PGT-M. So we did a first ovarian stimulation, and we had 23 eggs. Again, we were expecting 20%. So from this 23, theoretically speaking, we would have 4 eggs that could be compatible, but we have to play also with the pregnancy rate, even though Christina was 25 years old. So we could aspirate to have 50%, maybe 60%. So it was really narrow, and we would depend on luck. So we decided to freeze all of these eggs, and then we did a second ovarian stimulation, and we got 33 more eggs. So we ended up fertilizing 56 eggs between the fresh and the frozen. At the end of everything, we had 14 blastocysts, and we did the PGT-M for HLA for HLA compatibility, we get 3 compatible blastocysts. From those 3, we did PGT-A in order to see if they had the right number of chromosomes, and they were all euploid, which was amazing. Then we did the first embryo transfer, and the result was unfortunately negative. We got very worried because there could be something else, and we only had 2 additional embryos out of 56 eggs, and it was a lot for the patient. And so we studied her endometrium, and we ended up finding that her endometrium was only receptive at 145 hours of progesterone, which is what we call a misplacement of the window of implantation. So we did the frozen embryo transfer, respecting the indications from the ERA test, and so we had the birth of an healthy HLA-compatible child, and so hopefully everything will go well for this family. And so this is it, what I have to present you today. This is a picture of some of our team members. We are a lot more right now. And so I'm very happy to answer your questions. So please feel free to ask everything. Okay.
Thank you so much. Brilliant as always. Thank you so much for sharing all those cases. Definitely inspiring. And I'm always intrigued and happy to see such results as well. So thank you so much indeed. And well, as you can see, questions are right here, and patients are also right here for you to simply to listen to you and seeking some advice, because there are some patients that already have been here yesterday, and this is the first patient. So let me just have a look at this.
Okay.
I think you might remember, right? So thank you so much
it's
for
healthy.
exactly. Thank you so much for this session. You may remember me from yesterday's session. I'm 40. I just had failed IVF cycle. Before attempting a second IVF, I want to try an IUI with my best friend's sperm. He's 50 but leads a very healthy lifestyle. What do you think? My partner has low sperm motility and 1% sperm morphology. Prior to the IVF, I had a laparoscopy, and the surgeon found that I had narrow fallopian tubes. I've had 2 pregnancies at the age 35, 36, but both were terminated. I know IUI has a much lower success rate than IVF, but I wanted to give it a try with different sperm. Thank you so much again.
Well, Shilpi, I wouldn't advise you to do, thanks for being here again. And I wouldn't advise you to do IUI for maybe 2 different reasons. The first one is that when you are 40, I actually don't remember your AMH value, sorry. But when you are 40, in theoretical terms, the chances of success of an IUI are quite low. Okay, statistically speaking, it will be below 10%, or maybe even lower depending on the AMH. And so that factor alone, because on average, for example, from the data from the European Society of Reproductive, from the ESHRE, the European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, IUI has a global success rate around 8 or 9%. Okay, so when we get to patients aged 40 and older, it will be lower than that. Assuming, depending on the AMH and so on, it's certainly below 10%. Maybe it might be below 5%. So chances at the beginning, because of the egg factor, are already very low. On top of that, if you had problems in your tubes, if you had narrow tubes, we obviously would need to take a look at the report, but it could even be impossible, because if there is a tubal blockage, there's no way for an IUI to work. Okay, so if the tubes are narrow, I mean, we would really have to see, but if that's certainly another factor against you. And so maybe even a risk of ectopic pregnancy. We will have to take a look at it more carefully. But if you really want to try with a different person, maybe it's better to do IVF instead. Okay, so I mean, if the tubes are okay, you can try, okay? But I really don't know if that will really make a difference, okay, because of the female age factor. So it's a hard call, but I would say it's preferable to try IVF.
Thank you. Thank you so much, of course. And thank you for your recommendation here as well. And let's have a look. More questions are right here from Sayuri is the next one. I'm 41. I have had just my 7th transfer fail with a PGT-A normal embryo, already on steroids and blood thinners, intralipids. What more can I do? I have 2 more normal poor quality embryos left. I don't want to waste them, but not sure what else can be done. Never been pregnant, IVF or natural.
Well, this is actually why we don't get. I don't know if you remember in one of the graphics that I showed about PGT-A. In the best case scenario, we have 60%. 60 to 70% of pregnancy rate in those cases. Why is not 100? Why it is not? Is it not 100%? Because there is a part of the process, obviously, that involves the lab and the clinic and the treatment protocol, but the endometrium also plays a very important role. Steroids, blood thinners, intralipids are things that are used to take care of immune and hematological issues that may keep the embryos from implanting in the embryo in the uterus. Here, I would definitely advise Sayuri to do 2 tests. One of them is the endometrial receptivity analysis. There are multiple tests in the market. At Ferticentro, we work with the ERA test. ERA is the acronym for endometrial receptivity array, because we know that in some patients, the exposure to progesterone can have a very important role. Sometimes the endometrium only becomes, physiologically speaking, the endometrium becomes receptive after being exposed to progesterone for 120. Oh my God! So if you're and then. So I will complete the explanation, but Sayuri did the ERA test. So after being exposed to the progesterone, we know that it should be receptive at 120 hours. Some patients take longer. Sometimes some patients take less. There is one important thing about the ERA test is that it has to be done correctly, and it is only valid for 9 months. So that could also be an explanation. Sometimes patients might have accidental mistakes without even knowing that they made a mistake while taking the progesterone, or for some reason there was a problem in the absorption, and the ERA test results are actually wrong and misleading the clinic. So that would be another possibility. There is also the microbiome and the chronic endometritis issues, because sometimes there are local underlying infections in the uterus that are asymptomatic. So patients don't feel anything. We can't see anything in the ultrasound scan, but those infections are there and they are keeping the embryos to implant. For example, all women have bacteria inside their womb, but it has to be the right bacteria. It has to be at least 80% of lactobacilli, of lactobacillus. So sometimes there is an imbalance in those bacteria, and that can cause problems in the implantation process. Sometimes there are chronic endometritis. The uterus is colonized by pathogenic bacteria, and we need to give probiotics, antibiotics, or sometimes there are changes even in the endometrial factor, or in the window of implantation itself. In some even more rare cases, there could be immune incompatibilities issues. With people are talking a lot about the KIR, HLA compatibility, because we would have to see. I mean, I don't know if this is a treatment with Onex or with the with donor, a sperm donor or partner donor, but we would have to test all persons involved. Sayuri, if she's the one who provides the eggs, no need to test the egg donor. If this is done with egg donation, then we would also need to test the egg donor and her male partner, or the sperm donor if it's a sperm donor, in order to see if there is any incompatibility in terms of their immunity. Those cases where we have immunity incompatibility can be very hard to treat, and in fact, well, there are protocols that are designed to that, and we can use those. But I mean, we would have to take a look and maybe do further tests. I wouldn't transfer those remaining embryos without further tests. Okay, there are many protocols that can be used. Obviously, Sayuri talked about it. Natural cycle as well. Timing a cycle in natural cycle can be different than timing a cycle in an artificial cycle. So it's obviously not a very easy situation. Otherwise, she would already be pregnant. But we would need more information.
Of course, as always. But thank you so much, and I believe that was helpful. Thank you so much indeed. And of course, more questions are coming in, and let's have a look at this one. What's your opinion on day 3 biopsy and fresh embryo transfer? Is that different than day 5 biopsy and frozen embryo transfer?
I'm completely against day 3 biopsy and transferring the fresh embryo for two reasons. First, because it is relatively dangerous for the embryo. At day 3, the embryo has only about 8 cells. Okay, it's the normal number. If we take 1 or 2 of them, we are so we're taking cells from a very early embryo, and there are studies that have shown that the probability of the embryo to start a degeneration process is higher if we do a biopsy on day 3. Actually, in 2007, there was a study comparing day 3 PGT-A with doing nothing, and they concluded that it was actually preferable to do nothing than to do day 3 PGT-A because a lot of embryos were degenerating and leading to implantation failures because of the procedure. So I don't think these days, I mean, day 3 biopsies have been generally abandoned because of that. And these days we're all doing day 5. On top of that, embryo vitrification provides 98% survival rates, which is wonderful. And so that's a way, that is one of the solutions so it's a very reliable way of testing the embryos because we get to take more cells, so it's more representative of the embryo. And then embryos are stronger, they survive better to the biopsy procedure, and the chances that they survive vitrification are very high. Okay, so at our clinic, we don't do day 3 biopsies, and we will never do it. Okay, again, at least because in the past we used to do.
Of course. Thank you so much for the question, indeed, and your help and explanation to this. Very clear. And of course, there's a thanks from Sayuri from previous patient,
Wow.
and she also
Good luck,
added,
Sayuri.
of course, also
Yeah.
repeat era. Thank you. I didn't think of it, so
Yeah,
thanks.
that's an idea. There are also factors in the embryos that can justify the problem with Sayura, because embryos are not about genetic, are not just about. When we're doing PGT-A, we are evaluating the nucleus of the embryo, the nucleus of the cells, and so sometimes there are other things in the cells like the mitochondria that are also very important to give energy to the embryo to develop. There are studies, for example, there was a recent study about 2 years ago where they were getting the nucleus from for example, a 38-year-old lady with past history of horrible embryos. They were moving that nucleus into the cytoplasm of a cell of an egg donor. So they removed the nucleus from the egg donor, and they used the rest of the egg to and put the nucleus of the egg in there. Why did they do that? Because then there were the mitochondria from the egg donor sustaining the nucleus from the patient, and the results were wonderful. Okay, it's still a very experimental procedure. It's not something that you can do on a daily basis, but it's a very promising way. So sometimes this fragility of the embryo also explains why in certain PGT-A cases we're not getting pregnancies with genetically normal embryos, and why sometimes those embryos don't survive the freezing and thawing process. So it's one of the possible justifications. I obviously don't know, but it's something that worth looking at it. For example, here at Ferticentro, when we do PGT-A, we also do the mitoscore. It's a technique that allows us to have an idea of the mitochondrial potential of the embryo. It's still experimental. We're still seeing if it works or not, but it's one more factor that helps us to decide which embryo to transfer, especially when we have many.
Thank you so much. Actually, there was a question, last one actually, in regards to mitoscoring as well.
Yeah, I'm in favor. Okay, so Derek, I think that's exactly what I was saying. Sometimes it's just not about the nucleus of the cells; it's also about the mitochondria. And so mitoscoring, uh, the research on that is still very preliminary. Okay, we cannot say in a definitive way that it's the the holy grail of PGT-A, but I think it's a promising way of investigation, and I do hope that in a few years we're all doing that and getting good results from that, because that can actually help us to understand what's the implantation potential of the embryo besides the genetic factor. So it's not all about genetics. There are also other embryonic factors that can make things go wrong.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And there's a thanks from Derek right here. Okay, let's go to the previous question. Okay, it's regarding the case in patient number 1. Did you confirm your mosaic level by AI or not?
Well, I don't know what Abdul Ghaffar means by AI, but if it is artificial intelligence, well, we've not confirmed it because we rely on the results that are reported to us by the genetics lab. So when the genetics lab analyze the embryos, they just indicate us the percentage of mosaicism, and we work based on that. Okay, so then we do prenatal testing on the ongoing pregnancy to make sure that everything goes well. But normally there is a cutoff on mosaic embryos that we can transfer or not. In our case, there is not a consensus about this in the scientific community, but normally people say that above 40% it's relatively dangerous, or at least there is a certain risk that the abnormal cell line overlaps the normal one. But I mean, sometimes when patients only have that kind of embryos, so they take the risk. As long as they make informed decisions, this can actually work. And if we get one extra pregnancy out of even 100, that makes it worth it. Okay, so mosaicism is a very complicated issue. There is a lot of debate going on. Maybe with non-invasive pre-implantation genetic testing, this can be solved. But again, we are sorry, but again, we are still in the early days of that, so there is still a lot of investigation yet to be made.
Of course. Thank you so much indeed once again for that question indeed as well. and for your, again, explanation here. And let's have a look. Next question from Derek. Have you ever done a biopsy pre and post frozen embryo transfer? I would also like to see data following egg banking and PGT, PGD, etc.
Okay, I understand. Okay, PGD, PGT-A, etc. So the answer is yes. We've done it many times. Okay, and especially, for example, one of those cases, that's the case that I withdraw from the list of 4 because I thought, well, this could be boring for the patients, and I reduced them to 3. It was an interesting case. It was a patient with I really don't remember, but it was a lot of embryos. It was either 8 or 10 embryos, and then we started doing embryo transfers and getting negative results, and the embryos were all frozen, and so we warmed them up, we biopsied the embryos, we frozen them again, we got the results. We've seen that that there were 2 of them that were viable, and we've transferred one of the viable ones. So those embryos were created, they were frozen, they were warm, they were biopsied, they were frozen again, they were warmed again, and they were transferred. Okay, and that works. So with vitrification, we can do this if we have a good vitrification program. It is a very there is a very difficult learning curve to learn to have good results in vitrification, and we have to do it every day, many times a day. 365 days a year. Well, maybe 363 because of Christmas and so. But otherwise, we have to do it all the time. Okay. So regarding egg banking, it's more or less the same because when we freeze eggs, we have, roughly speaking, a 90% survival rate. When we freeze embryos, we have 98%. So there is a small difference. On the other hand, if we freeze eggs, we are saving an ICSI procedure, an additional biopsy procedure. So if we are freezing embryos instead of eggs, we are doubling a lot of expenses to the patients and a lot of procedures. So we also have to think about cost effectiveness. In order to get 90%, 98% of survival instead of 90, maybe it's preferable to use the eggs. And also, even from an ethical point of view, for patients, it is easier to have eggs frozen than to have embryos. It has a different meaning in emotional terms, and so this is why we generally favor oocyte banking, egg banking instead of embryo banking when we are doing multiple cycles before PGT, regardless of the type of PGT.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Indeed, definitely interesting question and definitely interesting answer to this one. And now might be our final question. So if you have more, you know what to do. Let's have a look. Okay. So Sebastian has a question. Why did you not transfer both embryos in case 1 without PGT-A? Do you repeat error every 9 months?
Well, the first case was that 42-year-old lady. Well, one of them was not apply. Why did we do PGT-A? Because the patient was 42. Okay, and when we have above the age of 39, we always recommend PGT-A. It was an informed decision from the patient. I always tell patients, it's kind of a bold statement, but I always tell her PGT-A is useless, and because it will not increase your pregnancy chance. However, it is not useless because it will give you more information about your embryos. So if you need that information to make a decision on what to do next, if this works or not, you should do PGT-A. If you just say, I will never consider egg donation, I just want to keep trying with my own eggs, then it's pointless to do PGT-A because we let nature do its role. So in this particular case, this patient was 42 years old, so above 39. She never tried, but she didn't close the door to egg donation. So she needed to know whether her embryos would be viable or not before before taking this bold decision of trying to get pregnant with someone else's eggs. And so this is why we ended up doing PGT-A. And so it was the patient who needed that information. And so, like I said, given the risks, we always talk about this possibility, but it's not a law. It's not something compulsory for the patients. It's something that we debate with the patients, we discuss with them, and ultimately it's the patient's decision. Okay, it's their life. If do we repeat a ERA test every 9 months? Probably yes. Okay, we will have to go on a patient-to-patient basis. I mean, we do hope not to have patients having negative results for 9 months, but if we spend more, I mean, if we have an ERA test older than 9 months and we are keeping negative results, we repeat it. And we've found not many, but a few cases where it changed the window of implantation after more than 9 months. So I definitely advise patients to do that.
Excellent. Thank you. Again, definitely interesting. Thank you for explaining. And as I mentioned, we will be finishing for tonight. But of course, remember, if you don't have more questions right now, you can always get in touch with Dr. Silva and his team at Ferticentro. And I am sure that they will be able to help you out even more because, of course, they will receive more details from you. That means they can definitely give you some more details as well. So thank you everyone for your, as always, interesting questions and for sharing, and also we do hope that it was useful, I'm sure. Dr. Vladimiro, as always, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's another great session, and I have only one thing to say: there will be one more session on Thursday. Dr. Vladimiro will be back, so I hope you will be able to join us. Of course, we will talk about remind me, recurrent failures, right?
Well, I don't have the title here, but
yes.
Well, I will definitely be back on Thursday if you still want to hear from me.
Yes, we definitely do. We definitely do. And there are some thank yous as always from the patients for you. Super helpful. I couldn't agree more. So thanks so much indeed for
guys.
that. And yeah, anything else you would wish to add before we finish?
No, well, I will just thank everyone for listening to me until this late in the evening after maybe a working day, having patience to listen to someone talking about a very technical and maybe somehow heavy issue. It's always a sign of bravery, and especially I would like to wish good luck for everyone who is going IVF all over the world, because I can see that we have people from everywhere. And obviously, I'm very happy to help all those in need, and you can contact me, and I'll be very happy to discuss with you individually your individual case. Okay.
Thank you so much. That's why we are here, just to give you this opportunity, of course, as well. And thank you so much. Okay, there's another comment which you need to see. Thank you for using some words.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. Remember, it has been, of course, recorded. You will have a chance to watch this if you wish to have a look at this and our previous webinars with Dr. Vladimiro. There were plenty of those interesting topics as well. So I can only encourage you to have a look at our YouTube channel. As you know, there are over 400 IVF webinars already. So plenty of useful and important things that might be useful, of course, for you. Thank you so much. We will be back tomorrow as well at 7 p.m. But also remember,
me Thursday, you tomorrow. Sorry.
Yes, I will be here 7 p.m. tomorrow, but Dr. Vladimiro, of course, will be here on Thursday as well. So if you haven't signed up yet, go ahead, do it. As you see, it's always a very interesting session. So I can only encourage you to. So thanks so much. Take care. See you very soon as well. Bye.
Bye.